Salisbury Vineyard didn't always look and feel like this. In fact, for quite a long time, we were just a tiny handful of people. It was Claire and I and Bethia, our first, was a tiny baby. There was one other couple who also had a little baby. They were so shy that if they heard that there might be visitors coming, they wouldn't show up. And we had 4 teenage boys, and that was Salisbury Vineyard. So from the outside, it looked like our effort to start a new church had completely failed. And the church that sponsored us, the church that sent us out to start a new church, decided that we had failed, and they announced that Salisbury Vineyard was closing. But God had a different plan. And those 4 teenage boys committed to praying with Claire and I 3 times a week, not on Zoom, in person. They negotiated with their parents to get lifts. They walked across town to get to our house. And they met with us and prayed. And they prayed that God would keep his promise and he would bless Salisbury Vineyard to grow. And look at what God has birthed from the prayers of those teenage boys. Now, don't come back to that at the end. As a church, we are looking at the gospel according to John. John was a first-hand eyewitness of the life of Jesus. He was Jesus' closest and longest-serving disciple. And it's really important that as we look at the gospel, we understand the goal of Jesus in coming to earth. His goal wasn't to build a fan club. It wasn't to get people to enroll in a program. It wasn't even to get lots of followers. What Jesus was looking for was to make disciples. His goal was to recruit, to train, and to deploy disciples who would then recruit, train, and deploy disciples. Disciples are people who have captured Jesus' heart and are wholeheartedly committed to living by Jesus' values, living according to his priorities, and living for his mission. They're people who are doing everything that they can to partner with heaven, to see all of heaven take over all of earth, one life at a time, by disciples of Jesus, making disciples of Jesus. And as a church, we have taken that invitation of Jesus to be disciples, not to pray a prayer and go to heaven, not to submit ourselves to a program or turn up to a particular building every week, at least once. Not that. We're taking Jesus' call to be disciples and as best that we can, trying to respond to that. And we've learned over the last year that disciples of Jesus live very intentionally. And there are 4 postures, there are 4 habits that they build into their lives as part of being disciples of Jesus. These are habits that Jesus had. And so they want, as his disciples, for them to become their own habits. And so disciples of Jesus are devoted to the scriptures, which is what we're doing right now. And disciples of Jesus are devoted to fellowship, which is why we are all here today and we're committed to being here every week. Disciples of Jesus are devoted to communion, which is what we've just done. And disciples of Jesus are devoted to prayer, which is what we are going to do. Those 4 things. And so we're very intentionally practicing those 4 things when we gather on a Sunday, not so that we can tick them off and say, well, we've done our things for the week and we can go off and live life however we choose to live it. No, we're practicing these things so that we develop an appetite for them. And we're practicing them because what you water in life is what grows. So we're deliberately watering these 4 things because this is what disciples of Jesus do. This is how you begin as a disciple of Jesus. You get these things into your life. And so we're looking at the gospel according to John. And we're going to pick up today where we left off last week. So just to remind you, last week we talked about this last and greatest prophet in the Bible, a man whose nickname was Baptizer. And God told Baptizer how to recognize the Messiah. And so when baptizer saw Jesus, he said, "That's him. That's him. God told me how to recognize him, and I'm telling you that is the Messiah." And two of baptizer's disciples heard what he said, and they decided to leave what baptizer was doing, to leave his ministry and to go and become disciples of Jesus. And baptizer wasn't threatened by that. He wasn't offended by that. He wasn't jealous of losing two people to Jesus. That was the whole point of his mission and his ministry. His whole purpose was to point people to Jesus. It was to get people ready for Jesus. It was to help people to not miss Jesus. And so if there was anything that baptizer felt about those two guys leaving and joining Jesus, it was probably a little bit of disappointment that there was only two. After all of his preaching, after being so clear about what he could see God doing, he said, "I have seen and I testify, this is the Son of God." After all of that, only two went to be disciples of Jesus. But those two went on to influence and inspire thousands of people to become disciples of Jesus through their testimony, through the example of the way that they lived, through their ministry. Hugely fruitful, began with just two. So we're going to pick up the story. This is from John chapter 1. We're at verse 39. We're going to pick up the story where these two disciples have come to Jesus and basically said, "Jesus, where are you hanging out? Because we'd like to be with you." So this is John chapter 1, it's verse 39. He said to them, "Come and see." They came and saw where he was staying and remained with him that day. Now, it was about the 10th hour. That's like 4 p.m. in the afternoon. One of the two who heard John speak, that's the baptizer, and followed him, was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Now when Jesus looked at him, that's Simon, he said, "You are Simon, the son of Jonah. You should be called Cephas," which is translated a stone. So, of those two disciples of baptizer who then went to be disciples of Jesus, one of them was a young fisherman called Andrew. And Andrew spent a couple hours with Jesus in Jesus' house. We don't know what they talked about. But at the end of that time, Andrew was completely convinced as to who Jesus was. And I've been thinking about this, what did Jesus say? I mean, what happened in that time in Jesus' house? And as I've thought about it, I've realized, oh no, it wasn't so much what Jesus said. Andrew was the kind of person that he recognized that baptizer had been sent by God. And if baptizer had said, "That is the Messiah," as far as Andrew was concerned, that was good enough for him. He believed the word of God. And so the first thing that Andrew did after spending time with Jesus, not the second thing, not what he did after supper, having got home from being with Jesus, not what he did as an afterthought, the first thing that he did after being with Jesus is go and find his brother Simon and say, "Simon, we have found the person that our whole nation is holding their breath for. We have found the person that the whole nation has been praying for generations. We found the Messiah." See, when you really meet Jesus, you discover someone who is so wonderful that you can't keep him to yourself. You want those that you love to meet him, and you can't not talk about him. You have to tell them about this incredible person that you've just met and are starting to get to know. And so if the Jesus that you know isn't someone that you're excited about, if he's not someone that you want to share with other people, not someone that you want to talk about, then you probably haven't really met Jesus. You might have just got an idea of what he's like, but you haven't met him. because he is a truly wonderful person that you cannot not talk about. So Andrew goes to Simon, and he doesn't try and argue Simon and say, look, here are 8 reasons why Jesus is the Messiah. He doesn't try to get Simon to pray a prayer and say, look, Simon, if you pray this prayer and believe in Jesus, then I'm allowed to take you to meet him. He just says, Simon, come and see. Come and see. Come and meet him for yourself. Because that is enough. That will be enough to convince you. What a curious first meeting. Andrew brings Simon to Jesus. Jesus sees Simon and says, Simon, I know your dad. Your name is going to be changed from Simon to Cephas. The name Simon means broken reed, and it was quite a popular name in this particular time among the Jewish people because it expressed their heart as a nation, that they were broken, that their faith was fragile. They were carrying these promises that God had given them, and they weren't being fulfilled. God had told them that he would be with them, and yet it didn't look like it. And so as a nation, there was this collective brokenness, and it seems like that name and everything that it stood for to that nation also spoke of where Simon was at. That as a person, he was broken. That he was living in hopelessness. And Jesus says, I imagine Jesus so excited to meet Simon because he has a little glimpse of what God is going to do in this man's life. And he says, Simon, today, that ends. Today, you are going to move from having a fragile hope to having something that is concrete. You're going to move from living in theory to living in experience and in reality. Suddenly, all the things that you have hoped for and begun to wonder, are these ever going to happen? Are these really real? Suddenly, you're going to start to see these things coming to pass. Simon, today, something amazing has begun. We're going to draw a line in the sand. You're going to leave that old name and everything that it stands for, the hopelessness, the emptiness, going to leave that behind. And God is going to do a work in you that means you have to have a new name to go with it, because the old name isn't going to fit anymore. The following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." So, Jesus found Philip. Philip went and found Nathanael, and then he told Nathanael that he'd found Jesus. So we've got the word found 3 times in really quick succession. There's lots of finding going on here. And a bit like Andrew, Philip can't keep to himself this Jesus that he's just met. We're not told what happened when Jesus found Philip. But there was something about Philip that Jesus had identified, and Jesus wanted Philip to be one of his disciples. He went out of his way to find him. It's like, I choose you. And something happened between them so that Philip wasn't able to keep what he just discovered to himself. So he now has to go and tell his best friend Nathanael, "Nathanael, we found the Messiah." You spot that? It's like, we found him. It's like, no, Jesus found you. But Philip's like, no, I found Jesus. It's like, what's going on there? Well, sometimes people know that this isn't it. But they don't know what it is. And so when they find Jesus and realize that he is it, it feels to them like they found him because they were looking for it. Because this isn't it. And so they found Jesus. So it's like, I found Jesus. And so Philip goes to Nathanael and says, we found the Messiah. His name's Jesus. He's from Nazareth. He's the son of Joseph. Do you know, Philip's theology wasn't correct yet. But that's not what Jesus was looking for. He wasn't looking for somebody whose theology was all correct. What he was looking for was somebody who knew that this isn't it. And somebody who wanted to find what it is, because this is not worth living for. There has to be more than this. Jesus was looking for somebody who, when they found it, would be willing to give their whole life, every breath that they had left, for that. That's the kind of person that Philip was. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered and said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. Jesus answered and said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, most assuredly, I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So Philip goes and finds his best friend Nathanael. And he tells him about Jesus, and the first thing that comes out of Nathanael's mouth is skepticism. But Philip doesn't try and argue with Nathanael. He doesn't come up with his explanation of the gospel. He doesn't come up with some kind of philosophical or clever historical argument to try and convince Nathanael about who Jesus is. He just says, come and see. Come and meet him for yourself. You see, Philip understood that the gospel isn't a program that you're trying to convince people to buy into. Neither is it a whole list of ideas that people have to say, yeah, I agree with those, I believe those things. He understood that the gospel isn't a moral code that you have to try and convince people to squeeze their life into. He understood that the gospel is a person. And that person is alive. That person is real. You can meet that person. You can have a conversation with that person. That person is amazing. And so Philip doesn't get drawn into any of that. He just says, just come and meet him. So Nathanael comes to meet Jesus. And within 2 sentences, he is utterly convinced, because of what Jesus has said to him, that this is the Son of God. This is the Savior of the world. This is the Messiah. Now, we don't know the significance of those 2 sentences to Nathanael. There are various ideas that people suggest of, oh, well, Jesus was meaning this, or Jesus was meaning this. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is that in those 2 things that Jesus said to him, I saw you under the fig tree, and you're an Israelite in whom is no God, no deceit in you. In those 2 things, Nathanael realized that Jesus knew things about him that there's no way he could have known naturally. There's no way he could have found them out naturally. And Nathanael felt so known and so loved by Jesus saying those 2 things that he was instantly in. He was convinced. Which brings me full circle back to the teenage boys. There's a really strong argument that most of Jesus' disciples were probably teenage boys. For starters, we're only told that Peter was married out of the disciples. And in that culture at that time, it was customary for men to get married at the age of 18. Second, when the local religious figures were checking the records to see who paid their subs to get membership of the temple. It was only Jesus and Peter that they required subs from. And you didn't have to pay temple tax until you were 20. Now, probably Matthew, the tax collector, was an exception, because to get to that kind of level of influence, you probably have taken a bit of time, and possibly Simon the Zealot was an exception. But certainly these 5, and probably maybe another 4, maybe 5 others were teenagers. Some people think that John, the youngest of the disciples, was possibly 12. Now, I'm not telling you that to be ageist or to suggest that Jesus was sexist. Let's just kick that one into touch. So in Luke's gospel, he tells us that Jesus traveled with his 12 disciples and a large group of ladies, which in that culture for a rabbi to do was absolutely unheard of, unprecedented. So Jesus was discipling these 12 guys, most of them the youth group, and he was discipling a large group of ladies who were part of his entourage. The point that I want to make is that what Jesus was looking for wasn't spiritual maturity. So you might be here today and you might feel like Peter. You might feel like your faith is just this thin thread that at any moment could be cut. The heartbeat of your faith, you're not sure if it's still beating anymore. But Jesus chose Peter. You might be like Andrew. You might be somebody who just has great faith in God. And you just need to be told, this is what God has said, and you're like, I believe it. You might be like Philip. You might be somebody who knows that this isn't it. And one of the reasons why you're here is that you have got to find what it is. Because life's too great a gift and it's too precious to spend on this. So you're looking for something more than this. Or maybe you're more like Nathaniel, skeptical. Just you feel let down by God so many times that you don't really know you can trust him. You're not really confident that he's only and always good. Jesus wasn't looking for perfect people, spiritually mature people. What he was looking for was people who were available. And what he was looking for was people who, when they met him and when they realized who he was, were willing to spend the whole of the rest of their lives on him. They couldn't imagine anything greater or more significant to live for. That's what Jesus is looking for.